I live in a city with a public transportation system. They've been extremely short-staffed, and more often than not, you have to call to make sure your bus is even coming. On weekdays, during business hours, the public transit operator will order a Lyft for you to get to work if your bus isn't showing up or if they're short a driver. Tuesday, I'm at the bus stop after checking multiple times if my bus is coming, only to find out that it wasn't. They ordered me a Lyft, and this nice older gentleman was my driver. We had casual conversation, and he started to ask personal questions. I'm a bartender, and I'm super friendly already, so I didn't think his questions were ill-intentioned. Told him I'm not married and that I'm pretty much a loner. I basically go to work and go home and spend my time with family. He then says, "I'd marry you in a heartbeat." Again, I'm just thinking that he's being funny or nice. I asked him to drop me off at the downtown grocery so I could pick up some things that I needed for work. When we stopped, he said he was joking, that he's married and has a son my age. Asked if I was interested in maybe meeting him. Since I have a terrible track record, I figured it wouldn't hurt meeting someone out of my circle and comfort zone, so I gave the man my number and we parted ways. The next morning he texted me and asked if I needed a ride to work. I told him he didn't have to do that and that I was sure my bus was running. He said it would be his pleasure and that he'd pick me up at my house at 3 p.m. Then about an hour later he asked if I wanted to have lunch with him before work. I told him I was busy and that I couldn't do that. He said, "Okay, see you at 3. He shows up right at 3 and lets me know that he's outside. While I'm finishing getting my things together, I open the door and he's starting to walk up my stairs to my house. I told him I was ready and we could head downtown. When I get in the back seat, he turns around and says that he has a confession. He told me from the time I took off my mask, his heart danced like a butterfly. He said that he hasn't been able to stop thinking about me since the day before and that he'd love to spend time with me and that he'd pay me for my time if I spent a day with him. That's when I started to feel super uncomfortable. The whole ride was making me cringe, but know that when you're in a situation like that with the predator, playing nice is sometimes safer than freaking out. He continued on the entire ride about how he loved me at first sight and wanted to make me his Lebanese queen. As we got closer to downtown, I started to feel relief. He dropped me off at my hotel and said, "See you tomorrow." That evening at work, I checked my phone after a bust happy hour and he's texted me a couple of times. He sent a picture of the hotel and said that he'd wait for me to get off to give me a ride home. I told him I already had a ride, but thank you anyways. Thursday morning, I'm out running errands with my mom and sister. He texts me and asks how early he can pick me up because he can't stop thinking about me. I asked him to please stop and that I was with family. He continues to text me all day and evening, begging to see me and telling me his heart is aching to see his Lebanese queen. I just kept saying to please stop. Now Friday morning is where stuff hit the fan. He tells me he loves me no matter what. He said I told my wife about you and that I'm in love with you and I want a divorce. I told him to please don't do that and that it wasn't right to treat his wife that way. He said it wasn't my fault. They were drifting apart anyways. Then he said I'm picking up for dinner at 5:30 and I'm not taking no for an answer. I ignored the messages during the day and just went about my off day. At around 5:25, my video doorbell rings and he's standing on my porch for at least 15 minutes. I told him I wasn't home and that he should leave. He continues to text me and even begs to come pick me up from my parents. I was home the whole time, but I was just too scared to let him know that. I eventually called the non-emergency police station, but he had already left by the time I got through. I filed a general report, but technically they can't do anything unless he's standing on my porch threatening me. They advised me to make a report through Lyft, so I did. And I haven't heard anything since then, but honestly, that was one of the most threatening and creepy moments of my life. I've also attached the doorbell footage so you can get an idea of what he's like.
Come on, open up, please. Be sweet. Don't disappoint me, please. Cat? Come on, hon, please open up. I know you're in there.
So I live in a pretty quiet part of my city, in a small 2-bedroom basement apartment with my roommate who was gone for the summer. I stayed here and worked during the summer. I do not get out all that often and don't know many people as I moved to the area 2 years ago. Just this last Saturday night, I was doing my usual gaming with some friends I had met on the internet, good friends of mine that I had known since I was 16, when I get this call from a private number. Now, I rarely get phone calls from people I know. Normally, communication is done just by texting. So I pick up, and what sounds like a man, maybe in his early to mid-40s, picks up the phone. The conversation went as follows. Hello? Hey, who is this? Who is this? It's Randy. Sorry, Randy, you've got the wrong number. I hang up. About 10 minutes later, he calls me again, and so I thought, he must have accidentally dialed my number again. So I ignored it and thought nothing of it, continue enjoying my time with my friends playing some games, Diablo 3, and by now it was about 9 p.m. and 9:30. Around 10 p.m. I get the call again. Being the not really giving a shit kind of guy, I just ignored it again. After all, I don't know anyone, and I have not known anyone in my lifetime by the name of Randy. Pretty logical to not answer, I would just be wasting my time, I thought. About an hour and a half passes by. It's about 11 p.m. now. I get the call yet again. So I answered, and literally the call goes exactly the same way as before. With one problem. I think I ended up saying too much. I added to the conversation. Sorry, you really have the wrong number. I don't know any Randys. Oh, you don't know me? Yeah, that's right. Well then, I guess I'm going to stop by, and I think you'll get a pretty good idea of who I am when I'm done with you. At this point, I was instantly freaked out, and I just hung up. I was getting kind of scared, but I got a grip on myself and just figured that he must have had beef with someone and just doesn't get that he's calling the wrong person. A few minutes later, I hear a vehicle pull into my driveway. Since I live in the basement and there is a window facing the driveway, his headlights were shining right in. I figured it was my neighbor coming home from his night shift at the hospital. I live in a tripleplex. A few minutes pass by and the lights are still on. Quickly, it all came flooding back into my mind. It's him, I thought, and my stomach began to knot, and I felt so afraid my hands began to tremble. I peeked through the curtains and watched the car for quite some time. I couldn't tell if there was anyone inside or not since the headlights were bright. He doesn't leave, so I called my brother who lives not far from me. I told him what happened, and he said, Okay, stay in the house, keep the door locked, I'm coming to get you, man. Now, my brother's a pretty intimidating guy if you've never met him before. 6'4", broad shoulders, big, badass-looking beard, etc. He comes up, I let him in, and he says, There's nobody in the car, dude. Yet the headlights are on. I pack up some things and we head off. He was kind enough to let me stay at his place for a few days until I felt okay. Upon returning to my apartment today, the same vehicle is in my driveway. I started freaking out, but there's nobody in the car. I noticed blankets on all the seats. For some reason, I looked in the opposite direction, right at my garbage bin, and written directly on the side, it says, It's me. I quickly went into my apartment and locked the door and took a shower. When I got out, the car was gone. Now I'm writing this. Honestly, I'm pretty fucking scared right now. When I was 22, I moved 1,000 miles away from my Midwest home to the beautiful foothills of Tennessee. I had a new job, new car, and a nice apartment, but didn't know a soul outside of work. If my phone rang, I expected to hear a faraway family member or my long-distance boyfriend who was still in college. This was a landline, no cell phones yet. Despite being very alone, I was managing well with the excitement of all the new things in my life. I had only lived there about 2 weeks when the unwanted calls started. The first call, a man's friendly voice asked what I was doing. I couldn't place him and thought maybe it was one of my cousins or uncles. I have a huge extended family. I ask him his name, he laughs a little, and his tone gets dark, a bit angry, and he says, "You know exactly who this is, darling." I pause, deciding if this guy simply called the wrong number or is a creep. I choose the former, laugh, and politely tell him he has the wrong number. He then recites my brand new, unlisted, unpublished phone number and my name. What the fuck, I thought. An intense chill races through me. I've only given my new number to my parents, sister, boyfriend, apartment manager, and employer. I'm new to the city in this lovely southern state. He does not like it that I tell him he called the wrong number and starts yelling at me, then tells me in a much calmer voice the many vulgar things he's going to do to me. I hang up and brush it off. He calls again around 1 a.m. I tell him to screw himself and hang up. He keeps calling, so I unplug the phone and return to sleep. However, as days go by, the calls continue and escalate. He starts mentioning personal things about me, said he liked the white quilt on my bed, knew what was in my fridge, that he's allergic to cats, I had one, and then asked me if I was in love with Mary. As I listened to his words, I was standing in my kitchen looking at the calendar taped to the fridge. It had Mary written in pink on the 17th with a heart around it, because Mary is my sister and the 17th is her birthday. I started shaking and crying, because suddenly I realized this creep has been in my apartment. I was alone, with no friends or family to run to for the night. It was me versus a creepy mystery man. I didn't sleep much that night. Early the next morning, I talked to the apartment complex manager before heading to work, telling her what had happened and that I want the locks changed that day. She gets a weird look on her face, and after a long pause, says she knows who's been in my apartment and that it won't happen again. What? I thought to myself. It turns out she had a creepy, rapey maintenance guy who noticed a young woman moving into an apartment alone and that I was his new pet. She had the locks changed immediately and promised that she would personally keep the other key. Although the calls stopped, I was paranoid for a year as I came and went from my apartment because I never even knew what this guy looked like. I moved out the moment my lease was up. Only after thinking about it years later did I realize that her weird expression likely meant that it had happened before. Plus, she didn't even fire him. I regret not calling the cops. I was young and naive. Back in 8th grade, probably halfway through the school year, I received a phone call from an unknown caller. Usually, I wouldn't answer for a number I didn't recognize, or sometimes I would do so in an accent, but I would always hang up after a second or two. Things changed, however, when the second I answered, I heard a man saying my full name in a questioning tone, like as if he was asking for confirmation that it was me. Being just a kid and thinking this was one of my parents' friends, or someone I could talk to, I told him that it was me. Big mistake, but I didn't know at the time. That first phone call I don't remember much of, except that he hung up not long after I said that was me. Some time passed, maybe less than a week, when I got an unknown call again. I didn't answer, and then I kept getting spam calls, so I finally answered, and this guy was asking me which shows I like to watch. I got the idea that maybe I shouldn't be talking to this guy, so I just immediately hung up. Not much long after, another couple of calls came in until I said to stop calling me, and he responded to something of the effect of, "Hanging up mid-conversation is rude." My dad heard me and asked who I was talking to, so I told him I didn't know and handed him the phone. My dad asked who this was and to stop calling my number in his angry dad tone. Then he got a confused face for a second before getting really angry and shouting at them before they abruptly hung up. My dad later told me that this person knew my father's name, and he told him, "Don't be so angry," before hanging up. Pretty soon these calls would happen at least once a day, and I would almost always hand the phone to my dad for him to yell at the guy. We told all our friends and family to stop if they were prank calling me. We tried getting police involved, and we also contacted my middle school saying there was a guy being creepy with me. The guy never called during school hours, and he would usually call at first when I was home alone, but soon switched it up to calling around the time my father got home from work. This guy sounded young. For a long time we thought my uncles or their friends were playing pranks on us. He sounded maybe mid to late 20s and sounded sort of Latino. Never had an angry tone and never said anything malicious, but he was a stalker, and he knew the names of my parents, sister, my dogs, some cousins, and my grandparents. He never called when we had company over, and it was never after 8 p.m. At one point I was sitting in my room and got a call. By this point it was nearing the last few weeks of school, and because this guy never said anything bad and police said there was nothing to do, I just answered the phone and asked what he wanted. I remember clear as day he was listing off video games: Red Dead Redemption, Modern Warfare 2, Halo 3, etc. I looked at my disc stand and saw he was reading off the list in order that my games were, top to bottom. I stood up and looked out the window, but nobody was there. After the list was done, I just stood there and he told me something about having good taste in games and that we should play sometime. At this moment, I was scared shitless. I cried and called my dad. He came home early and we realized like idiots that we could just change my number. We changed my number and I purged my Facebook account, and we all set our accounts to private. Maybe 6 months later we moved, and after changing the number, I never got any calls from this guy. The reason I came to tell this story is because I've been getting unknown numbers calling me for the past couple of days, and I never answered them anymore. But telling my girlfriend about it, she reminded me about that guy. So, needless to say, I will be changing my number soon, as a precaution.
Our official merch store is finally here. If you want to support more of our channel, check out our merch shop. The link is in the description down below. See you on the next video.